Look at the Lions. Just look at them in all their majestic beauty. A powerhouse of the NFC North, absolutely dominating teams all year. The embodiment of aggression, ferocity in every drive, towing the line every single game and play call between insanity and genius. They are one of, if not the most electrifying team to watch. As of right now, they're preparing to go to the NFC Championship game where they're taking on a sneaky little sub-dynasty of the Kyle Shanahan-led 49ers. But did you know it hasn't always been this way? In fact, it hasn't been this way in a long time. But to truly appreciate where we are right now, first, I must take you back, but not as far as you might think. Instead of going back necessarily, we're gonna go down to rock bottom. The rock bottom of all rock bottoms. The infamous, the very first in NFL history 0-16 season. This is a season I describe as one of benign sanity. Like, they sucked. But no one was confused as to why they sucked. Everyone knew they would. Led by a triage of quarterbacks by the name of Kitna, Orlovsky, and Culpepper, the season was a complete mess from top to bottom. They were dead last defensively in points allowed, giving up over 32 points on average. They were 6th worst in scoring, putting up only 16.6 points a game. And if that doesn't paint a bleak enough picture of their season, the actual games will. They were only able to keep it within a single score 4 of the 16 games, with their closest loss being to divisional rival Vikings in a 10-12 match, which gave us the amazing and original Orlovsky. But that was the bottom of the barrel. That's as low as it gets. And the Lions would try for years to shed themselves of the stench of failure and to try to claw themselves back into the realms of relevance. But now I've got something to admit. I'm not a native Lions fan per se. I mean, I loved watching them this year, but in order to get a full perspective of the situation, I had to call in the big guns. Someone who's been on the Lions path for a long time. Pride of Detroit writer Hamza to fill me in on what things were like during the, not rebuild era, but we'll call it the retry era. An era of staggering similarity. How things would change so much just to never change at all.
Thanks, Isaac. To tell this story, we gotta go back to rock bottom, 0-16. 2008. The Lions were coming off the league's first ever winless season, and they brought in then Titans defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz and general manager Martin Mayhew to right the ship in Detroit. And right the ship they did. It took 3 seasons, but Schwartz and Mayhew and a kid out of Georgia by the name of Matthew Stafford sent the Lions to the playoffs in 2011. The playoffs, that was unfathomable just a couple years prior. They got manhandled by the Saints, but it didn't matter. They were no longer the butt of every NFL joke, and they were a team to be reckoned with. But over time, the team grew too reliant on Stafford and they failed to build around him, leading to 2 more seasons of mediocrity before Jim Schwartz was sent packing. You can narrow down the inflection point in Jim Schwartz's tenure to a single play, a fake field goal against the Steelers in 2013. It was week 11. The Lions were 6-3, coming off a bye week and then a win. They were hot. They were making it known they were a force to be reckoned with. Their 2012 season with a 4-12 record was just a fluke. They headed into Pittsburgh in the pouring rain, and they had a 27-23 lead in the 4th quarter, and they were driving in the Steelers' red zone. On 4th down from the Steelers' 9-yard line, they looked to settle for a field goal, but it would put them up 7 points. Instead, they put the ball in the hands of punter Sam Martin, who in the pouring rain went through the D-gap and had his eyes set on the end zone. But so did the Steelers' defense. They beat him there, forced a turnover. The Steelers wouldn't look back. It was a loss for the Lions, and the Lions wouldn't look back either, going 1-6 down the stretch and ending the Jim Schwartz era at the end of the season in Detroit. Enter Jim Caldwell. He was fresh off the Ravens Super Bowl run, where he brought out an elite version of Joe Flacco, and he was asked to do the same with Stafford. Ultimately, he did, and the next couple of years we saw the most maturation out of Matthew Stafford that we would see at any point in his career. It brought a lot of success, a lot of late game heroics. The Lions adopted the nickname Cardiac Cats, and they'd go to the playoffs twice in 4 years. That may have been a good story, but that's not what they brought Caldwell for. Schwartz could have done that for them. In 2014, it was another classic rivalry between the Lions and the refs. A 4th quarter lead would vanish when a pass interference flag on linebacker Anthony Hitchens was picked up, inexplicably, and Des Bryant came flying into the field with his helmet off, wasn't flagged for that. The Lions would blow the lead instead of sealing a game with what should have been an automatic first down, and that was that. In 2016, the Lions made it back to the playoffs so they'd lose at the hands of the Seahawks. That wasn't enough in Detroit, and Martin Mayhew was fired, and the Ford family brought in Bob Quinn from the Patriots front office in a last-ditch effort to give Stafford more talent. However, in 2017, the Lions fell short of those expectations, and they didn't make the playoffs. Bob Quinn let go of Jim Caldwell and brought in his own guy to get the Lions over the hump. Matt Patricia. The Lions were going the Patriot way. That went about as well as it did for anyone else who tried to replicate the Patriot way. Matt Patricia sucked the life out of the Lions locker room, having numerous feuds with star players like Darius Slay and Quandre Diggs, and then trading them away for pennies on the dollar. It was a long and ugly 3 years, and instead of getting the Lions over the hump, they were back to square zero. After 12 seasons in Detroit and 3 head coaches, Matthew Stafford requested a trade and the Lions would turn the page again.
And this gut punch of a trade request led us to this crazy hire. The hire of a man by the name of Dan Campbell. And at this point, he's no stranger to the football world, so I don't need to get too much into his backstory, but I'll still give you a quick brief on why people thought the Lions were actually nuts for hiring this guy. Campbell was a player, as many coaches were, who had a pretty long career in the league. He was originally drafted to the Giants in '99 before being signed out of free agency by the Cowboys. It would be at the Cowboys where injuries would begin to plague him as a player. Torn ligaments in his foot, getting an appendix removed on July 24th of 2004 before miraculously making it back and playing most of the season. But in 2007, the Cowboys would part ways with Campbell, leading to, you believe it, the Lions picking him up just in time for 2008 to witness just an atrocity against the sports world, even though he was on injured reserve for most of the season. But all the injuries would add up, and after a stint in 2009 with the Saints, he would part ways with the game as a player and usher in the era of Dan Campbell, the coach. He would start as a Dolphins intern, get promoted to a tight ends coach, and stay there until 2015, until their coaching staff was dismissed and Campbell found himself as an assistant head coach, still coaching tight ends for the Saints. And you may think, oh, so he went from tight ends with the Saints to maybe an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and then from there they got him as a head coach? No. That wouldn't be Dan Campbell enough. He didn't come in to be the most pristine and tidy man for the position. He didn't come in to check off boxes of what people thought a good head coach would be. They had been doing that already and it hadn't worked. He came in to win goddamn football games. He came in to, as I believe he said, bite kneecaps off. And while now you may be looking back at it like, wow, that's badass, this dude is badass. At the time, all this talk provided more questions than answers. I mean, he had never been a head coach before, and now he's spouting some stuff that bordered between cool and goofy. The Lions fans during this period all collectively held their breath, as Dan promised to interject the team with a little bit of that Detroit grit, that Detroit insanity. And you know, as much as people wanted this hire to be the bounce back of a lifetime, realistically, with their current projection before Dan, it just wasn't going to be the case. Not if they wanted long-term success. It would be more like turning around a cruise ship than a car. So there would be a lot they would need to do if they wanted to make this happen, and the first was this crazy idea of trading away your franchise quarterback. And while technically this trade happened a few days before the Campbell hire, there's no way coming into this he didn't know it was about to happen. And many people viewed this as trading down at quarterback and picking up a guy in Jared Goff who really hadn't done anything special and is viewed more as a mid-level game manager. And it reflected with a trade, because Goff came in with a 2021 third round pick, a 22 first round pick, and a 23 first round pick. So not only would Dan have to rebuild the culture of this organization, but he'd have to do it without arguably a top 10 quarterback in this league. And as we came into the 21 season, things were looking just about as bleak for the team as they had ever looked.
The start of the 2021 season was not a pretty one for the Lions. It was painful. For some people, this was expected. They had to tear down the bad in order to build up the good. For others, there was a portion of the Lions fan base that would drink the blue Kool-Aid no matter the circumstance and believe that even this team could find a way to entertain and, more importantly, to win games. That wasn't the case in September. Despite a valiant effort in Week 1 against the 49ers, the Lions got manhandled in a way that's worse than the score would indicate. It wasn't much better in Week 2 as they'd get pummeled by the Packers. In Week 3, the Lions looked like they were slated to pull off their first win against a very handy Ravens team, but a missed delay of game call paved the way for Justin Tucker to hit a league record 66-yard field goal, screwing the Lions in a way that only the Lions could get screwed. October wasn't much better. The Lions spent the better part of that month getting manhandled, and November wouldn't feature any wins either. But November brought hope in the air. You see, even though the Lions wouldn't get a win, they'd snap their losing streak by tying with the Mason Rudolph-led Steelers in Week 10. You'd think, judging by the reaction from Lions fans in the city of Detroit, that they were going to have a celebratory parade straight down Woodward Avenue after that one. Even though it wasn't a win in the record book, it was a win for every Lions fan, and there was belief again in the fan base. Every Lions fan at some point mentioned, only half joking, that this meant that the Lions wouldn't go 0-17 that season. Eventually, in Week 13, the Lions would get their first real win coming against the Minnesota Vikings. It happened in a pretty poetic way, with then rookie 4th-round wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown catching the game-winning touchdown pass and beginning his emergence as a star receiver. It was fitting that a young, gritty guy that the front office snagged on day 3 of the draft would give the Lions their first win of the season, and it was a glimpse of what could happen if somehow things went right in Detroit. Mind you, Detroit was doing this all with what felt like a ragtag team. The new front office had to tear down the old roster before constructing their vision of the future. The Lions were relying on rookies, undrafted free agents, and guys signed off the street to start and get the job done on Sunday. Some of the year's best performances came from players like rookie Jamar Jefferson, a 7th round running back, or Godwin Igwebuike, who used to be a safety and was taught to be a running back, primarily playing special teams, but stepping in at will to tear defenses apart as a running back. The Lions' pass rush was anchored by journeyman Charles Harris and Romeo Okwara, who the Lions claimed off waivers from the Giants a couple years prior. At times, it was star running back Craig Reynolds, who was jokingly dubbed Netflix by the coaching staff because they would acknowledge that they just signed him off the couch. That's right, the same Craig Reynolds who scored the go-ahead touchdown last week in the divisional round against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Down the stretch, a lot more went right for Detroit. They were playing with nothing to lose, going forward on 4th down, faking punts, shamelessly calling every trick play in the book, doing whatever it took to win. They were able to squeeze a couple more wins out of the rest of their schedule, including taking down the Arizona Cardinals, who at the time were one of the league's hottest teams, despite the Lions going into that game with just a single win. It was a testament to the belief of every player, coach, and fan in Ford Field. As the season came to a close, it was clear that the Lions had some really good young pieces in place, pieces that just might turn Detroit into a good football team if things went right. Somehow, a season with just 3 wins felt remarkably successful in the city of Detroit.
So after that late season burst of life revitalized the team and gave fans that very faint glimmer of hope that the insane play calling and their nuts new head coach might just work out, we also got to see a little bit of the behind the scenes of how different things were in the offseason with the introduction of the Hard Knocks documentary series focused on the Lions, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we all got a little bit more bought in on this Lions team. But despite all the promise, they once again in 2022 came off to a slow start, but it was still different. They lost a close game to the Eagles, but this is the same Eagles that were about to find themselves in the Super Bowl. And while the Lions didn't have that hindsight that we did, they played them damn close and were just a stop away on an infamous brotherly shove to getting the ball back and potentially winning this game. Then they beat the Commanders, a team that is the epitome of a litmus test to determine if you are a decent football team or not, but their slide would continue, dropping 5 consecutive games. So there they are, 2 weeks after a bye, sitting at 1-6, and the murmurs were already starting like they might be done, like they were going to be counted out and have another disappointing season, all things considered. But this wasn't the regular team. This wasn't the regular mentality. It's like the words of Campbell came to life in this program. They were knocked down. They were missing a tooth. They were sitting on their ass, and they were looking for a kneecap to bite on the way back up. And the kneecap in front of them was divisional rival Green Bay. Now, the Packers weren't just going to roll over and let the Lions win it, but the Lions had a couple tricks up their sleeves. Like on their first touchdown of the game, they go for 2. A small footnote it might feel like, but when the Packers tried to retaliate with their own 2-point conversion, they were held out of the end zone to maintain a 2-point lead despite both teams having scored a touchdown. They were able to extend that lead with an early 4th quarter touchdown, which now changed it to a 9-point favorite instead of a 2-point. But the Packers field goal pulled them within striking range. But the Lions were looking to ice the game on a late 4th quarter drive, and this is something you're going to see them do a lot. With 2 minutes and 40 seconds left, facing a 3rd and 1, they were poised to win the game. Goff hands the ball off and Williams was stuffed. -2 yards on the run. So now on the 43-yard line, they're going to send out the punter, and oh my god, what are they doing? They're keeping their offense out there? Oh my gosh, they just threw an incompletion on 4th and 3 in pin punt territory, holding on to only a 6-point lead against Aaron Rodgers? This was beyond insanity, but god dang was it exciting. And the icing on the cake is the madmen of the Lions held off the Packers from scoring, and we'd start to see the first of this Joker-like ideology, I'll call it. The concept that it's not about winning, it's about sending a message. And the message is that the Lions were going to do things their way, and you would either stop it or get run over by it. And this theme would persist. They would finish out their season 8-2 from that point, and being so disruptive to the NFL that they were just a couple things going right away from making the playoffs after starting 1-6. Also, the last game of the season, up by only 3, these lunatics attempted a 4th down conversion and got it to put the game on ice. But with all the promise at the end of the season, people wondered, could it continue? Could this momentum actually keep up into the 2023 season, or were they doomed to be second half teams? Doomed to be knocked down, forced to simply nibble on kneecaps in the late season rallies rather than make meaningful plays at the beginning to take them to the playoffs. So now let me introduce you to the 2023 Lions, who are now in the promised land. And at this point, you know they made the playoffs, but let's just talk a little bit about how they got there. Because it was pure, unadulterated insanity. So much of the season could be described as not about winning, but about sending a message. Take for instance, first game of the season, drive number 2, facing a 4th and 2 with the entire game ahead of them, still 0-0, and they fake a punt against the Super Bowl incumbent Chiefs to pick up the first down. They turned that drive into a touchdown and turned that touchdown into a win. Or the week after, they had 3 4th down conversion attempts, only succeeding on 1, but like I said, it wasn't about winning. It was about the message. The Dan Campbell show no fear, line up and play message that we're all addicted to. And the players were bought in. Do you know how many times you don't get guys' best effort when you think a bad play is called? Doubt will set in. It's one of the biggest differences that'll never show up on a stat sheet in a way you can measure. But this was quite the opposite. Here, we see categorically bad calls that the Lions have so much faith in, they just make it work against the Packers. Early in the season, they had a sizable lead, but only costly turnovers in a game like this could make a miracle happen. Everyone knows it. So when they lined up on 4th and 3 and pass it to St. Brown, you have to have elite level trust. Or 4th and 2, game on the line against the Chargers. They're already in field goal range with 1 minute and 47 seconds left in the game. And Goff finds Laporta for 6 yards. For 6! Do you realize how crazy you have to be to potentially give the Chargers the ball back without the lead right here if you don't pick up this first down? But the players bought in. They didn't waver and iced the game. This ridiculous play calling and aggression didn't just come in wins, but it definitely reared its head in losses. Their second game against the Packers this season, they attempted 4 4th down conversions, with one of them being a fake punt, and converted none of them. One of which immediately set the Packers up to score 3 plays later in a game that would be decided by 7 points. But like I said, it wasn't about winning. It was about telling the other teams of the league, you better be ready, because even when you are, we're not going to stop. The best example of this is now the infamous Cowboys game. The Lions score. An extra point could tie the game, but instead they go for 2, but due to some confusion, there's a flag thrown and the attempt is nullified. 99.99% of coaches here take the extra point and go to overtime, but not Dan. Dan is not part of the 99.99. He lines up again and goes for it unsuccessfully, but thanks to an offsides, they get a 3rd attempt. Now, of the 0.01% that would have gone for it a second time, none of them go for it a 3rd time. Let me remind you, an extra point here ties the game and takes it to overtime, but there is no other Dan Campbell. And running this play wasn't so much about winning and losing. He said in the presser after that he told his guys they were going for 2 no matter what happened. So they went for 2 no matter what happened, despite the fact that it lost them the game. So I think I speak for everyone when I say the Lions have turned the corner. It goes beyond a particular player. It goes beyond a particular scheme. There is no one linchpin holding this entire team together, but instead an unwavering attitude. The attitude that no matter how far you get down, no matter how far gone everyone thinks they are, they're gonna keep swinging, they're gonna keep attacking, and they're gonna find a way to win. And that's why I think they are going to be good for a very, very long time.
I mean, Dan Campbell setting the tone already for this season. Anything goes.